You rolling?
Pardon?
The video?
Yep. I
Oh.
never turn it
Oh, you
off.
didn't turn it off? So you caught all the...
All their conversations.
Um,
About your tie.
Sorry.
This, what is called the Festina affair, has a has had a great impact on use of drugs in sport. This is an event that happened just prior to the Tour de France in 1998. Festina is a company that makes watches. It's an Italian company, and they sponsored a cycling team, just like many other corporate sponsors do. And what happened was the night before the competition began, the trainer for the Festina team was stopped for a traffic violation in France. And when the officer looked inside the vehicle, he saw all kinds of cartons and stuff and asked, "What is this stuff?" Well, the driver didn't really want to admit what he was carrying, so the officer took a look in one of and there was all this drugs, all kinds of drugs, EPO, amphetamines, you name it, he was carrying it. Well, being the trainer for one of the teams, he was arrested, and the rest, I guess you'd say, is history, because as a result of that, it dawned on the officials at the race that the use of drugs was totally out of control. Everybody apparently was using them with impunity, and there was trafficking in the stuff, and no matter what the rules were, people were getting away with these things right and left. And that was the incident that sparked a real change in how the sporting world looked at the use of drugs. As a direct result of what happened there, an organization was formed, the World Anti-Doping Agency, to control worldwide, as the name implies, worldwide, control doping of athletes. It was founded in the following year. It's now headquartered in Montreal. It's an independent foundation, and its reach is very wide. It works with all sporting federations throughout the world to implement testing procedures. They develop lists of prohibited drugs and methods. They standardize rules, and they control the testing. There are, I think there's something like 25 testing laboratories around the world. There may be a few in addition to what I have here. This is a couple of years old. But you'll notice that where the stars are, that's where the laboratories are. So every continent, except Antarctica, of course, but every continent has a testing laboratory. Most of them are located in Europe. The U.S., I believe, has only one, and that's in San Francisco. Montreal has one, Havana has one, etc. So these are laboratories that are accredited by WADA. And you will hear about WADA a lot in the news. You read about doping issues, because they really are the world's governing body. And it all came about as a result of concern erupting out of the Festina affair. There are offshoot agencies. Many countries have their own anti-doping agency, including the United States. This was founded shortly after WADA was founded, and it receives funding from the IOC, the United States government, and other organizations. And basically, the role of these organizations, even at the national level, conduct research on various drugs and their effect on athletic performance, educate the public, educate athletes, testing procedures. Every once in a while you will run across research papers that are under the auspices of either USADA or one of the other government agencies around the world, or WADA itself, in which they try to perfect testing methods, and they manage the results. It's all fairly tightly controlled today. There are procedures when and how athletes give samples, how those samples are treated, how those samples are stored, and every step along the way in the pathway to testing and the results of the testing are controlled. These are examples of links where you can find lists of prohibited substances. You can see the long list if you wish. WADA's list is at the top. You have the USADA's prohibited list, NCAA, and on and on and on. You can go through various sporting agencies, and they will all have a list of prohibited substances. And they're updated. The updating is usually under the control of WADA or the USADA in this country, to make sure that anything new that comes along, they catch it before the athletes start using it in large numbers. Well, professional sports, somewhat different, although the Olympics, we used to think of as amateur sports, but obviously that's not the case anymore. But professional sports have their own peculiarities. For example, Major League Baseball, the NHL, the NBA, the NFL, because they have contracts with players, with the Players Association. And so anything in the way of drug testing has to be approved through mutual agreement in the contract. Major League Baseball has probably one of the strictest, as a result of everything that's gone before in the last 15 years, probably has the most restrictive sanctions. Up there I have anabolic steroids, but that list has now been added to. Human growth hormone now is controlled, that came about last year. Stimulants, amphetamines, street drugs even now are controlled in Major League Baseball. And the sanction is, just like what happened with Johnny Peralta, 50-game suspension. Second time, 100-game suspension. And third time, you're out. Lifetime ban. Most other sports don't have a lifetime ban. Notice the NFL, the worst you can get is a third offense is a 1-year suspension. NBA, you can be suspended for 25 games. But
slap on the wrist right there.
yeah, but Major League Baseball, and I think in response to the concern that was voiced by several senators many years ago, the last decade, when the Major League Baseball came out with the original list, they had like first offense 10 games, second offense 20 games, and third offense like 50 games. And that was the response of Congress. Some senators came out and publicly said this is not good enough. So, lifetime ban. Now, how Alex Rodriguez, who was also caught up in the biogenesis thing, he got a suspension of 120 games, I think it was. 120, I don't know how they came up with that number. But he appealed it, and now he is sitting out the whole 2014 season. They reduced it to 162 games. I don't know how that happened. But anyway. Okay, let's talk about the science a little bit. The anabolic androgenic steroids. That's testosterone, structure of testosterone. Steroid with the 4 rings. It's synthesized from cholesterol, just like all the steroidal hormones. Synthesized by the cleaving of this bond of cholesterol. Produces the ketone here. This is called pregnenolone. Pregnenolone then gets oxidized at the 17 alpha position, which then gets this side chain cleaved to a ketone, and that compound is called dehydroepiandrosterone, DHEA. We'll talk about DHEA later if time permits. And DHEA is isomerized. It's actually oxidized, not isomerized, but oxidized to androstenedione, andro for short, which then is converted reversibly to testosterone. That's the biosynthetic pathway. So DHEA and andro are both precursors, metabolic precursors to testosterone. That's important to remember. Then we mentioned before that androgens are converted to estrogens, and this comes about, remember, aromatase, enzyme we spoke about in cancer chemotherapy, aromatase inhibitors. Aromatase knocks off this methyl group, aromatizes the ring to give you the estrogen, estrone or estradiol, made directly from either androstenedione or testosterone. Although we associate androgens, obviously, mostly with male function, it does have some function in females. And this is seen primarily when you have an insufficiency. Low levels of androgens in females do give rise to certain symptoms like impaired sexual functioning, mood alterations, and effects on energy and well-being. But of course, we always associate their primary effects with males, as we're all aware. Testosterone is not the active compound. Testosterone is converted to the active metabolite, dihydrotestosterone. So as you remember, drugs to treat BPH, for example, block that activation of testosterone. This is the actual active androgen, the DHT. Androgens do have approved uses. FDA has approved them for the purposes you see here, things like endometriosis in females, hypogonadism in males. These are considered legitimate FDA-approved uses. But in the context of unapproved uses, off-label uses, there are a number of uses, including osteoporosis, certain cardiovascular conditions, Raynaud's disease, AIDS, etc. And then at the bottom one we put here is enhance athletic performance. I always tell the story that I first learned of the use of androgens to enhance athletic performance about 40 years ago, when as a young faculty member here I was invited to speak to a group of athletes, weightlifters and bodybuilders, at Henry Ford Library in Dearborn. And they asked me to speak. I said, well, I didn't know anything about steroids and use and those. So I read about it. I read whatever I could, and I said, well, I'll tell you what I've read about. Well, I went through the literature, and there's stuff that you would read about in pharmacology books. But I wasn't prepared for what I was going to face with this group of people. Because immediately it was apparent that they knew far more about the use of these drugs in weightlifters and bodybuilders than I would ever know, because they were personal users of it. In fact, that's where I first learned of the name Arnold Schwarzenegger, when one of the guys brought a magazine with a picture of Schwarzenegger on the cover. You know, big. This was before his movie star days and all that. And that's where I was more the student and they were the teacher. There. That's where that's a picture of me there when I was younger. Well, the anabolic functions of testosterone mostly talked about increased red blood cell mass, for example, decreased body fat. One of the primary functions in terms of anabolism is to increase nitrogen retention, enhance protein synthesis, and muscle, of course, a lot of protein there. And this is a major effect of testosterone and other anabolic steroids, enhance protein synthesis. You can just skip over this sort of a repetition. So these steroids have really two different effects, and you can separate these effects out. The anabolic effect to increase muscle mass, and the androgenic effect to enhance male characteristics. And we have the anabolic androgenic ratio, testosterone and its esters, basically one-to-one relationship. But then with other derivatives like methyl testosterone, the ratio goes up as high as 4, and halotestin can go as high as 6, androlone, oxandrolone, about 13 times. Stanozolol, that's Winstrol, can be as high as 20 times, where the anabolic effect is 20 times the androgenic effect. So some of these, like Winstrol, for example, stanozolol, may be used in cancer patients, for example, who may be debilitating, experiencing cachexia, where the muscle mass is wasting away. They may be given steroids like that to build up tissue. Nandrolone, decanoate, is a drug. It lacks the methyl group there, you notice? What happened? Yeah. It lacks the methyl group. But this is a very powerful anabolic agent. And it's used, usually given in oil. It's a long chain there, the decanoate. You see this long chain makes it soluble in oil, so it's usually used. And then that's called decadurabolin, the trade name. This is very popular with steroid users. How these steroids are used is highly variable. There are what are called in the field cycles. There's no necessarily rhyme or reason, no scientific basis for this sort of regimens, but anyway, this is basic terminology. As you call a cycle, where somebody will go on a particular drug, like an oral androgenic steroid, using a single drug for the first cycle. And you say, well, okay, I'll take this for about 6 to 8 weeks. Then they may go off of it for a little bit. Then they go on and off, varying, thinking that will help them. As I say, there's no necessarily science behind it, but and they might even use the same drug, higher doses as they proceed, building up their muscle. May go through different cycles. One cycle with one drug, another cycle with another drug, and terms like pyramiding you will see used. Pyramiding basically means elevating or escalating the dose every time you go through a cycle. Use one drug. If you're using the same drug all the time, maybe the second cycle you use a greater amount, higher dose. Third cycle you have a higher dose still. Stacking refers to using more than one drug at the same time. So you might use Winstrol and testosterone, for example, or decadurabolin and Winstrol, and maybe add testosterone to it for whatever reason.
Hanley,
And
is the cycling, like, I've seen some of these terms too, and I'm still not sure. I mean, is the cycling sort of related to, like, leading up to an event? Like, I've got an event in June. So
right.
it's
Yeah,
a cycle
that's a
so
good
that
good
June
point.
I can perform and still pass my test.
That's a good point. Part of the rationale for doing this is the athlete thinking, building themselves up, and then maybe going cold turkey for a time. Maybe they build themselves up to maybe 2 months before the event in the hopes that their muscle mass will stay intact and that they will be undetected at the time of the event. Stacking the pyramid simply means escalating doses and increasing the number of drugs. So you may go up to 2 or 3 drugs, escalate into dose. Highly individualized, no rationale necessarily behind it. I think you probably have shown these sort of graphs.
We talked about monitoring the future.
Yeah, monitoring the
We've not shown
future.
this yet, though.
I haven't kept up, because usually every year they do an update. These are surveys that are done, mostly teenagers, young adults. And you can see that this is the use of steroids, that they tended to peak in the middle of the last decade. I don't know if there's been a resurgence in that in the last couple of years. But anyway, it tended to peak here. Perhaps that was with the publicity that was going on with athletes, I don't know. But then it's tailed off. This is run out of University of Michigan, I think. And this is another one of monitoring the future. Studies where, what is this one? Steroids, again, different age groups. Which age group is this? This is the youngest age? Can't tell. Oh, I can see it here.
18.
Let's see. Use my glasses. What does that say? 18 years. I guess that's the top graph. You think so?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the top tends to be used more by the late teenagers, 18 to 20-year-olds. Less so by the early 20s. This one goes up to 32 years of age.